program tonight is titled Exploring the Kansas River. The Kansas River is the most dominant geographical feature of the Eudora area. The banks along the Kansas River have been home to numerous Native American tribes for thousands of years. One of the tribes that lived along the banks of the Kansas River was the Kansas tribe, the namesake of the river and of the state of Kansas. Eudora was established by German immigrants in 1857. One of the main reasons that the German immigrants favored this location was because of its proximity to the Kansas River. The Kansas River floodplain in the Eudora area is a highly fertile and productive agricultural region. Both Native Americans and later European Americans took advantage of this fertile soil for agricultural purposes. However, there was a major drawback to living and farming in such close proximity to the Kansas River. It frequently floods. Large and devastating floods of the Kansas River in the Eudora area occurred in 1844, 1903, 1908, 1951, and 1993, with the 1951 flood being by far the most damaging. The Kansas River has therefore both benefited and damaged the Eudora area. As a result, it's safe to say the Kansas River has been an integral part of the history of Eudora. Our program tonight will be delivered by Dawn Bueller. Dawn is the Kansas River Keeper and Executive Director with Friends of the Kaw. In her role as the Kansas River Keeper, Dawn is a non-governmental public advocate that works to protect and preserve the Kansas River. Dawn holds a Bachelor of Science in Natural Resources, Fish and Wildlife Conservation from Oregon State, and a Bachelor in Business Administration from Baker University. Dawn is Governor Laura Kelly's appointee as Chair of the Kansas Water Authority and the Governor's appointee for the Oil and Gas Advisory Committee. Dawn previously delivered a program here in Eudora in 2017. That was the summer when we hosted a Smithsonian exhibit titled Waterways. So we had water-related programs in the summer of 2017, and her program was very popular, so we're very excited to welcome her back. Please welcome Dawn Bueller.
Thank you, Ben. It's good to see you all, and to those online as well. It's a great opportunity to be here and to come back. 2017, I feel like that really dates me. It's been a day or two ago. A lot has changed at Friends of the Kaw since 2017, but also a lot has changed with the Kansas River as well. So I've got a few things that I'm going to cover tonight just to share information and to give you some updates on what's happening with the river. But I always like to start off with a beautiful golden sunset. So this is around St. George, Kansas. So it's west of Topeka. And this was a particularly lovely evening in the summer. It was actually in July, and it was unseasonably cool for July. And the sky lit up, and it was absolutely spectacular. This is not uncommon. This happens all the time, whether it's a sunset or a sunrise. Some of the most beautiful ones that you'll find are out on the river. Of course, I'm partial. I think Kansas has the most beautiful sunsets, probably just about anywhere. So just kind of an overview very briefly. We're a 501c3 nonprofit. We've been around for, we're on 34 years. So it's been a long time that our nonprofit's been in existence. And it's changed a lot over the years. When it was started in 1991, it was really about dredging on the Kansas River and some folks that were against dredging. And so that's how the organization started. But today, it's changed a lot. We do a lot of education, a lot of advocacy, and a lot of programs just to get people interested in the river. So my job is the Kansas River Keeper, and this is a non-governmental public advocate for the Kansas River. We're a member of an organization called Waterkeeper Alliance. It's a global network of waterkeepers worldwide. There's about 300 across the world. A lot of them are found along the coast. They can be coastal keepers, bay keepers, water keepers. I'm kind of the only one in the middle part of the country. It'd be nice to have some other waterkeeper friends, but a lot of them are on the coast. But my job is to be the ears, the eyes, the voice of the river, and to hold the community accountable for the health of the river. And the reason this is so important is that 950,000 Kansans get their drinking water from the Kansas River. So this makes our work really critically important to take care of the drinking water source for our communities. So just a little bit about me. I'm actually a DeSoto native, and I do live in Eudora. I moved a whole 7 miles down the road. I grew up in the DeSoto Bottoms on a 2,000-acre vegetable farm called Riverview Farms. I'm a member of the Morse family, if you know any of those. That's my maiden name. And my dad was Paul Morse, and I spent my childhood working on the farm. We all had to work. It was my dad and my uncle and my grandpa and all the kids, and it really was a great childhood. But when I wasn't working on the farm, picking watermelons or cantaloupe or picking sweet corn or driving a potato truck, some of my favorite things to do, I would spend my time on the Kansas River. My dad could not take a lot of time off from work. As a farmer, he worked pretty much darn near 7 days a week. So when we did take a rare afternoon off, we would go out on the Kansas River and we would go fishing in a little john boat. And my sister and I would go with Dad and go fishing. We would also later, when we were a little bit older, we would camp on the sandbars. My dad would take us out to the sandbar and drop us off with my aunt and my mom and all of us kids, and we would stay out there, and then he'd come back and get us. And you all probably know this, but if you're a farmer, you're more than likely a mechanic. And my dad was probably a better mechanic. He would describe it as a better mechanic than farmer, but he was a really good mechanic, and he put a 1957 Chevy engine on the back of an airboat hull. And so when I was in middle school, he had an airboat that he would take up and down the river. So this is my great-great-grandpa's Alles-Chalmers tractor. I still own it today. Even though I don't farm, I do live in rural Douglas County, south of Eudora, but I still have it. I just can't part with it. So my husband and I still take care of it. So this is mode of transportation. There's my dad's airboat from the 1970s. And then the top middle photograph is my husband and I on the Kansas River today in a john boat owned by Friends of the Kaw. We get around with a mud motor because that's the best way to get around the sandbars. And then the top right-hand photo is me in my kayak, and that is a barrel that I found on the river. And if I can fit something on my kayak, I'll take it off the river that day. I'm not going to leave it. So we believe that one tire off the river is one tire off the river, and it doesn't matter if you take it in a kayak or you take 100 at a time. So I'm going to go over a little bit about what we do. Just very briefly, I think a lot of folks out in the community that have seen our organization for a really long time, they think that we're an outfitter, and we are not. We are not an organization that simply rents canoes and kayaks to the public. We are an advocacy and educational organization. So I do all of our advocacy work, which means I work with cities and counties in the state of Kansas to make sure that we're making decisions that are in the best interest of the Kansas River. We are the only nonprofit that cleans up the Kansas River, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. We are probably most known for our educational paddle trips, which is where we take the public, but also students in grades in high school and college out on the Kansas River, and we use it as a living classroom. So in that case, we'll teach students about water quality testing, or they might learn about sediment transportation or geology, but different ways that they can use the river as part of their classroom activities. We also have our water quality education program at grades 6 through 12. We have done some work at Eudora High School. We also do work at DeSoto High School, Lawrence High School, Shawnee Mission School District, Kansas City, Kansas. And basically we have a week-long class where students can learn about water quality issues, but the highlight is they get to go to a stream that's closest to their school, and they will get to do the water quality testing themselves. So I spent all day today. I know I look showered, but you should have seen me 2 hours ago. I spent all day today taking water samples on the Kansas River, which I'll talk about here in a little bit. But, muddy, sweaty, messy, dirty, and I love every bit of it. It really takes me back to my childhood when that's what life was like on the farm. You didn't have to worry about what your hair looked like, but these students get to see what that's like for a day. So they'll take all kinds of different water tests. So They might test for chemical testing or for non-chemical testing, dissolved oxygen, macroinvertebrates, but it's an opportunity for them to see what it's like to be a scientist and to learn about water quality. So I'm going to briefly speak about my advocacy work at the state level, just so you leave with a little bit of knowledge. I won't dive too deep into it, but we do work with the state of Kansas and with cities and counties on different projects to take care of the Kansas River. An example of that is that right now we're working on a pilot project with the city of Lawrence. They are working on these stormwater socks that they want to put on the end of stormwater drains to see the trash, what stormwater drains it's coming from. And we want to inventory, I know this sounds a little crazy, but we want to inventory the trash because we want to see what is it that we're finding in the stormwater drains and does it match what we find on the river. And then we want to do some educational programming around that. So we think that the trash is coming through the stormwater drains, and we think it's coming from, for example, ball fields, because there's a lot of activity. Trash cans don't get emptied as much. All you need is a windy day and the trash is off to the nearest stream. And the other place is gas stations. How many times have you been to a gas station and the trash can's overflowing? And it's often that they just don't have the resources to empty it as quickly as we're all funneling through the gas stations, but those are some of the programming that we're going to work on to see if we can't help some of our community members help us deal with the trash problems. So that's the way that we work with cities and counties, just as an example. But I was appointed by Governor Kelly as the chair of the Kansas Water Authority in 2021. And I'll show you a couple slides to explain that. And then also the Oil and Gas Advisory Committee. So that committee's job is to think about how those activities impact water. I'm also on the Sunflower Army Ammunition Plant Restoration Advisory Board. So this is the board that is overseeing the public. It's not overseeing, let me restate that. It is the board that is responsible for advising the Sunflower Army Ammunition Plant team on the cleanup efforts and to bring the questions of the public to the Army and try and bring those back to the community. So I'm on that board, and then a couple others as well. So the Kansas Water Authority, it was established in 1981 by statute. It's written in the Kansas statutes. Really, the Water Authority is an advisory board. We all are appointed. All of us except for 2 members are appointed by the governor. 2 members are appointed by the President of the Senate and the Speaker of the House. The ones that are appointed by the governor, almost all of them, they represent some sort of entity. And I'll show you a map here in a minute to illustrate that. But our job is to advise the governor, the legislature, and the director of the Water Office on water policy issues, to approve the state's water plan for the entire state of Kansas, to improve federal contracts. So for example, the city of Lawrence has a federal contract for Clinton Reservoir to use water from that reservoir because they have 2 sources of drinking water, the surface water of the Kansas River and Clinton Reservoir. But the only way they can take water from Clinton is they have to have an approved water marketing contract, which our board has to approve in order for that to happen. So that happens across the entire state. And we also issue an annual report to the governor and the legislature, and we make recommendations on the budget for the state water plan every year. So this is a map, and I really just want to show this to you so you can see Don Buehler Eudora is on the map. These are folks that are all across the state and represent different entities. So, for example, there's a guy out in La Crosse, Kansas, Jeremiah Hobbs. He represents the State Association of Kansas Watersheds. So that state association would provide 3 names to Governor Kelly, or whoever the governor is, 3 names, and then the governor gets to pick from those 3 names. But those names come from these different entities because that's who they represent. So these are the 5 pillars of the Kansas State Water Plan. So I just wanted you to leave today with a very high level knowledge of what we're working on at the state level. So the first one says, conserve and extend the High Plains Aquifer. This is the Ogallala Aquifer in western Kansas. It's in deep decline. It's been declining for decades, and we need to come up with some local driven solutions that try and help us extend the life of the aquifer. At the same time, we have a very large economy based on our agriculture in that part of the state, and so we also need to protect that part of our income for the state. So there's a lot of factors at play. There's a lot of communities that rely on that whole entire network within the agricultural community. So we're trying to come up with locally driven ways that we can extend the life of the aquifer. Secure and protect and restore our Kansas reservoirs. This is because they're all filling in with sediment. They had a lifespan, and many of them are reaching that lifespan. So one of the projects that the state has initiated is a pilot project called water injection dredging. And water injection dredging is where it's a very novel concept, but this is a program where they're pilot testing, taking water, injecting it into the bed of Tuttle Creek Reservoir, and then sending the sediment downstream into the Big Blue River and into the Kansas River. So the state of Kansas needs to do something about the fact that our reservoirs are filling in with sediment. And traditional dredging is cost prohibitive. We can't afford it. We cannot dredge our way out of this problem. So the Corps of Engineers and the Kansas Water Office are doing this pilot project to see if they can bypass sediment through the dam. The problem is there's a lot of potentially negative impacts to the Kansas River downstream. That's why I was out sampling all day today and yesterday, and I will be back tomorrow. I'm following the leading edge of this wall of sediment down the Kansas River. So we'll see what happens with the pilot project. I want to, wait and see what the data says, wait and see what our results say, and wait and see what the federal and the state agencies have to say with all the data. There is a lot of data being collected downstream, both aquatic data, water quality data. There's a lot, metals, they're testing for metals. So we'll have a really good idea at the end of this pilot project what it's going to look like. So anyway, that's happening. Improve the state's water quality. We have a lot of water quality problems in Kansas, so part of the state water plan is to work on that. Reduce all vulnerability to extreme events, so droughts and floods. How can we better prepare for those activities? I mean, when we have a really big drought like we've had the last couple of years, that's really hard on all of us. Increase awareness of Kansas water resources is all about education. All right, so I'm going to share now some kind of fun stuff about the Kansas River watershed. This is like my favorite part of talking about the Kansas River. So the Kansas River is the longest prairie-based river in the world. And most people don't think of that existing in Kansas. And we're pretty proud of it, but what I find alarming is that we haven't shouted it from the rooftops. I really think that the state of Kansas, the travel and tourism industries should say, we have the longest prairie river in the world, and it's right here in Kansas. Kind of like how we talk about the Flint Hills being the last remaining remnant of tallgrass prairie. But what does it mean to be the longest prairie-based river system? It means that none of the tributaries of the Kansas River start in the mountains. They all start in the prairie. And the Kansas River at one time was almost completely surrounded by prairie. A little bit on the eastern end was not, but definitely the western end of the river was surrounded by prairie. It was surrounded by these really deep, tall, deep-rooted grasses that would protect the water and filter out all the sediment and the pollutants before it made its way into the river. And it's the sand, the limestone that's in the prairie that gives us those beautiful golden braided sandbars. And so that's one of my concerns with this injection dredging project of sending mud down the river is that it will cover the sandbars. So that's kind of the hallmark and the beauty of the river, is having those beautiful sandbars. It's home to a wide variety of plants and animals. We do see otter on the river now, which is a really good sign. There was a time when we did not find otter on the Kansas River. A lot of beaver, turtles, great blue heron, bald eagles. The photo on the top right, I just took that in March. Those were all bald eagles and one little group of trees, and that was upstream of Lawrence around Lecompton. And it was just so shocking to see them all there gathered together. Usually you'd see one or two in a 10-mile stretch, and we saw all of these in one spot. It was the end of the winter, the start of the spring. So,
Do you know how many are nesting now?
the last time that we got the number from the Corps of Engineers, and it's been a couple of years since they did the survey, it was a record 27 nesting pair at the time. I personally think it's way higher than that now. Yeah. Just because we see so many more. Like, I've got the last 10 years in my job, and of course prior to that I was on the river too, but the last 10 years I've been watching it diligently, and it's increased quite a bit in the last few years. See a lot more nests than we used to see. We know where they're at. Of course, we don't tell anyone. You're not supposed to talk about where the nests are, so yeah. Anyway, I think you all probably already know a lot of this information, but the river is known locally as the Kaw. It was named after the Kanza peoples, and you know, they lived along the river as far back as the 1730s. And the river was really dangerous for people that were traveling it. And you know, what's interesting about it is when they say, you know, you go back and you read in history that it was shallow certain times of the year and much deeper and kind of treacherous other times of the year, it still tends to have some of those same issues. I mean, during the summer it can get really shallow and braided, and if you don't know how to read the river when it's really, really low, you're gonna walk on sandbars. And but in the spring it can get really high, and it's not conducive for, you know, really beginner paddling. So you kind of have to know when is a good time to be on the river. Also, I think it's just really interesting when we talk about the fact that there were 34 steamboats that were known to have been on the Kansas River from 1854 to 1866, and that it had cargoes of passengers. I cannot imagine that. First of all, and maybe because the river has changed so much, but it would have had to have been when the river was really high in the spring, because in the fall, in the summer, when it gets really low, the channel that you have to stay in where the deep water is, it's no wider than my kayak. So how did they get a ship like that down the river? It had to have been at the times when it was really high.
Going west, you want to leave early in the season, so as soon as the snow is over, make your run. So.
And maybe back then they had a longer season of that high water, because today we don't. Like, it often the winter will end up being pretty low and dry, and then maybe the rains will hit mid-April. I'm talking about the kind of rains that raise the river,
yeah.
Right? And then it tends to be like June when the river's higher, and then it drops again in July. So it's kind of, it probably has changed over the decades.
And they were more agrarian, so they wanted to get to where they were going early in the season.
Right?
They weren't necessarily passengers.
No.
Manhattan is created that way.
Exactly. Manhattan was created that way, which is a pretty cool story. So this is the Kansas River watershed. So a watershed is the area where everything drains to a single point. In our case, it's the Kansas River. So think of it this way. If you have, you know, sloping land and it drains all down to our little river here. So see the white line at the top and the white line on the left. So everything below the white line, that's pretty much the upper half of Kansas. So the corner on the very northeast corner, up around Atchison, that little piece of land drains straight to the Missouri River. So it doesn't come all the way down to the Kansas. So we've got this entire upper half. So if you go all the way out to Thomas County, Kansas, which is where Colby is, you also have Hayes, Kansas, Logan County, Wallace County, that whole entire area drains here. Then you have eastern Colorado. If you've been to Lyman, Colorado, I'm sure most people have, and if you stand and face to the east and it rains and you don't use it or divert it for some other purpose, that water will flow right past Eudora. That's kind of crazy to think about, isn't it? But that's how watersheds work. Then the upper portion above the white line is central Nebraska. Now, central Nebraska tends to be the workhorse of our watershed. They get a lot more rain, at least at certain key times of the year. I don't know about all year, but in the spring, they tend to get more. So let's go on a journey with rivers. So the Kansas River starts right here. So it's a really big area, but the river starts there. It's where two rivers meet. So the town of Junction City is called Junction City because it's where two rivers meet. And it's the Smoky Hill River and the Republican River. The Smoky Hill River starts right out here. And in fact, I've been to the Smoky Hill River in Logan County, and it's only about this wide. And it's surrounded by grass on the area that I was at. I think it was in the middle of a pasture, but it was
still a river.
Yeah, it's not very big, but it gets wider as it moves.
What defines a river?
It's the headwaters of the Smoky Hill River. Yeah, the headwaters. So then the Republican River starts in Colorado. And in fact, if you're driving down I-70, you'll go over, there's a North Fork and a South Fork, and you'll go over one of the forks on I-70. But those two forks come over the Kansas state line, and then they combine to create one Republican River. That river goes north into Nebraska, then turns around, comes back south into Kansas, and is dammed at Milford Reservoir. And that's where it meets the Smoky Hill River, and then the Kansas River flows 173 miles to where it meets the Missouri River in Kansas City, Kansas. So along the way, if you see that first little blue spot right here, this is Milford Reservoir. The next one downstream, the long skinny one, that is Tuttle Creek Reservoir in Manhattan. That's where they're doing that water injection dredging project. That reservoir drains Nebraska. The Big Blue River is dammed at Tuttle Creek Reservoir. So that is the workhorse of the Kansas River. So you know how sometimes you'll drive over the river bridge and you'll be like, wow, the river's so high, but it hasn't rained here? Well, obviously it doesn't have to rain here. It can rain anywhere in this 61,000 square miles. But a lot of times it's Tuttle Creek that's releasing. Tuttle first, Perry second, Milford third, Clinton fourth, in terms of the amount of water they get into their watershed and how much they're releasing into the river. So Tuttle Creek, a lot of times, it has navigational duties for the Kansas River and the Missouri River. So sometimes it's required to release, but it also releases for water quality. So they'll have minimum flow releases to meet water quality targets on the Kansas River. So that's a really important reservoir, which is also why they're trying to get the sediment out of it. So if you keep going down, you'll see the Perry Reservoir, which dams the Delaware River, and then Clinton Reservoir that dams the Wakarusa River, right upstream of Eudora. So that's our watershed, and once it meets the Missouri River, it goes down the Missouri River to the Mississippi to the Gulf of Mexico. So we have 61,000 square miles, but I think of this like stacking cups. I'm a grandma now, so I have a lot of stacking cups. You know how the cups, one stacks inside of another, inside of another? Watersheds are really the same way. So the Kansas River watershed sits within the Missouri River watershed. And then the Missouri River sits within the Mississippi. And no, you may or may not know your geologic history, but the Kansas River really was formed by a glacier. Pretty cool to think about that. A glacier that came down into Kansas and carved out the Kansas River Valley, and then the waters melted, creating the Kansas River. And that river valley is 138 miles long, but the Kansas River is 173 miles long. Well, why do you think that is? It's because it meanders. I mean, every time you think you're on the side of the river where the channel's at, it pushes you to the other side. And we get this all the time from the public. All I do is go back and forth, and I'm like, well, that's what rivers do. A river's job is to transport sediment and energy. And as it transports that energy, it hits the outer bends, and that's where it'll erode that outer bend. And then it'll deposit it on the inside bend. And over time, rivers shift. They're constantly moving. So it creates all these different bends. Also, there are areas where the river will take a really big turn, almost like a big C, like have a big, huge bend. We've got several of them here around Eudora. And all it takes is a really big flood, like 1993 or 2019, and the river will cut a new path and decide, I'm not going to go that route anymore, and cut off in a different direction and create a new island in the middle of the river. So I also think it's really interesting that between Junction City and Bonner Springs, the river drops 294 feet, right? It's a gradient of almost exactly 2 feet per mile. I like to tell this story of, a lot of people think, we all deal with this, that Kansas is flat. It's really not unless you're in Dodge City, right? That's about the flattest point, is down in that corner of the state. But the rest of the state really is not flat. Now, if you only see it from I-70, yes, it looks flat. But if you get off the interstate, it is not. Well, the Kansas River is no exception. So the little town of Ogden, which is between Manhattan and Junction City, it's a little town there right off of Highway 18. We have a boat ramp there, and it's 14 miles from Ogden to Manhattan. I would say that's one of my favorite stretches. My favorite one, just because of my childhood, is Eudora to DeSoto. I know that section like the back of my hand. I spent so much time there as a child. But this section out there is in the Flint Hills. And so imagine this for a minute. You're going around a bend and you turn around and you look behind you and the river's above your head. And you look in front of you and the river's below you. That happens on the Kansas River because you're in a Flint Hill, right? The hills are still there, even though the river's moving through them. And so it's pretty cool to feel that gradient change when you're on the river. There are many times, I've gotten used to it now, where I can see when we're going down, I can feel it. And you're basically going down from Junction City all the way to Kansas City. It's just, it's steeper at different times, but it's pretty cool. So the Kansas River Valley, it's the widest between Wamego and Rossville, and it used to flood up to 4 miles wide. So let's talk about the river system for a second. If you go down to, let's say you go to the DeSoto boat ramp, because at the Eudora boat ramp you'll see the Wakarusa, but or you could look from the bridge that goes over the Kansas River. And you ever notice how the banks are really tall? So there's this huge cut bank and the river's all the way down there, but yet it looks like you're gonna stand on the top of a huge tower to look down on the river. The river used to be up where the bank is. That's where it was when it was connected to its floodplain. And when it's connected to its floodplain, it would flood up to 4 miles wide, and it narrows as it gets closer to Kansas City, but it would flood, and it would come back, and it would flood, and it would come back. That flooding, though, while it's disruptive to our human needs, it also is what gave us Class 1 agricultural soils, right? Because you've got all those nutrients coming from the river. Well, 1951 just proved too much for us to handle. My dad took me on a drive through the DeSoto Bottoms. He passed away, in fact, 10 years ago today. And he took me on a drive through the bottoms and was telling me about what all we lost in 1951 in the DeSoto Bottoms. Oh, you know, your aunt had a place here, or there was this barn here, and how it was all devastated from the flood. So after that flood, we started putting in these reservoirs. Kansas has an enormous amount of reservoirs, like more than, I don't know if it's the more than any other state, but it is up there at the top. It is a lot of reservoirs. But we put these reservoirs in place because we built our communities along the river. So you think about Kansas City, Kansas, and Topeka, two of the oldest cities on the Kansas River. They were built, and then we had all these floods, and we lost lives and our economy and everything else. And so we put these reservoirs in place, and that's what allows us to live here. So we would not be able to live here if we did not have those reservoirs. So it's a double-edged sword, right? I would love to see our Prairie River reconnected to its floodplain, but I also know that means I wouldn't live here. I wouldn't live where I live, and neither would you. So anyway, it's just interesting to think about how it was a long time ago.
So if the glacier was the one that built the ridge up there at Clearfield, and so would we be regularly watching water go over our heads here?
I don't know. It's interesting to think about, though, isn't it? I mean, I think it's fascinating. We did a event called Geology in the Kaw on the Kansas River, where we took people out and we brought Kansas Geological Survey along, and they talked about the bones that we would find and becoming fossilized, and they talked about, like, we found an eroded bank, and they talked about what all those different layers of sediment were and when they were deposited. It was fascinating. We were just geeking out on a sandbar. So anyway, yeah. The Kansas River, it's a drinking water source for over 950,000 Kansans. Some communities get their drinking water straight from the surface water of the Kansas River. So for example, Topeka, its only source of drinking water is the surface water of the Kansas River. The city of Lawrence pulls in from the surface water. They also have Clinton Reservoir. But a lot of communities, including Eudora, get it from the alluvial aquifer. And an alluvial aquifer is the storage area that's underground that's next to the river. So just think about it like a couple of bladders, not really like that, but a couple of bladders run along the side of the river. So the water will infiltrate through the sand and into those little areas along the river and create these alluvial aquifers. And what's great about that water is that the sand filters out all the pollutants, and so that's pretty decent water, whereas the surface water takes a little bit more to clean it up than it does through the alluvial. But the city of Olathe has a lot of pumps, alluvials, pumps along the Kansas River. The city of Manhattan, city of DeSoto, in fact, Panasonic is pulling from the alluvial. So the Kansas River Valley, it's the widest between Wamego and Rossville, and it used to flood up to 4 miles wide. So let's talk about the river system for a second. If you go down to, let's say you go to the DeSoto boat ramp, because at the Eudora boat ramp you'll see the Wakarusa, but or you could look from the bridge that goes over the Kansas River. And you ever notice how the banks are really tall? So there's this huge cut bank and the river's all the way down there, but yet it looks like you're gonna stand on the top of a huge tower to look down on the river. The river used to be up where the bank is. That's where it was when it was connected to its floodplain. And when it's connected to its floodplain, it would flood up to 4 miles wide, and it narrows as it gets closer to Kansas City. But it would flood, and it would come back, and it would flood, and it would come back. That flooding, though, while it's disruptive to our human needs, it also is what gave us Class 1 agricultural soils, right? Because you got all those nutrients coming from the river. Well, 1951 just proved too much for us to handle. My dad took me on a drive through the DeSoto Bottoms. He passed away, in fact, 10 years ago today. And he took me on a drive through the bottoms and was telling me about what all we lost in 1951 in the DeSoto Bottoms. Oh, you know, your aunt had a place here, or there was this barn here, and how it was all devastated from the flood. So after that flood, we started putting in these reservoirs. Kansas has an enormous amount of reservoirs, like more than, I don't know if it's the more than any other state, but it is up there at the top. It is a lot of reservoirs. But we put these reservoirs in place because we built our communities along the river. So you think about Kansas City, Kansas, and Topeka, two of the oldest cities on the Kansas River. They were built, and then we had all these floods, and we lost lives and our economy and everything else. And so we put these reservoirs in place, and that's what allows us to live here. So we would not be able to live here if we did not have those reservoirs. So it's a double-edged sword, right? I would love to see our Prairie River reconnected to its floodplain, but I also know that means I wouldn't live here. I wouldn't live where I live, and neither would you. So anyway, it's just interesting to think about how it was a long time ago.
So if the glacier was the one that built the ridge up there at Clearfield, and so would we be regularly watching water go over our heads here?
I don't know. It's interesting to think about, though, isn't it? I mean, I think it's fascinating. We did a event called Geology in the Kaw on the Kansas River, where we took people out and we brought Kansas Geological Survey along, and they talked about the bones that we would find and becoming fossilized, and they talked about, like, we found an eroded bank, and they talked about what all those different layers of sediment were and when they were deposited. It's fascinating. We were just geeking out on a sandbar. So anyway, yeah. The Kansas River, it's a drinking water source for over 950,000 Kansans. Some communities get their drinking water straight from the surface water of the Kansas River. So for example, Topeka, its only source of drinking water is the surface water of the Kansas River. The city of Lawrence pulls in from the surface water. They also have Clinton Reservoir. But a lot of communities, including Eudora, get it from the alluvial aquifer. And an alluvial aquifer is the storage area that's underground that's next to the river. So just think about it like a couple of bladders, not really like that, but a couple of bladders run along the side of the river. So the water will infiltrate through the sand and into those little areas along the river and create these alluvial aquifers. And what's great about that water is that the sand filters out all the pollutants, and so that's pretty decent water, whereas the surface water takes a little bit more to clean it up than it does through the alluvial. But city of Olathe has a lot of pumps, alluvials, pumps along the Kansas River. The city of Manhattan, city of DeSoto, in fact, Panasonic is pulling from the alluvial for their new plant. So there are, everyone in this whole entire valley is getting their water in some way through the Kansas River system. So just information here, the Kansas River was dedicated in 2012 as a national water trail, and this just elevates it I'm gonna show you a map just so you'll know where all you can enjoy it, but the National Park Service made it a national water trail. We were only the second in the nation to be named a national water trail. And most people, again, don't think of Kansas as the place to go for a national water trail, so it's kind of cool that we have that designation. And recreation, it's good for the economy and for tourism, but the Kansas River is a public waterway. It's only one of only 3 in the entire state of Kansas. So the Kansas River, the Arkansas River in the southern part of the state, and the Missouri River are the only 3 public rivers. All other rivers are private unless they're surrounded by state, federal, or local land. So that means that you cannot be on them unless you have permission from the landowner on both sides of the river. So I'll give you an example. We'll use the Wakarusa River, okay? So if you're on the Wakarusa River above Clinton Reservoir, so as the Wakarusa's coming in and it's dammed, right? You have 14 miles that is public waterway because it's surrounded by a federal wildlife area on both sides. So there's a boat ramp up there. You can kayak, you can go fishing. Most people don't even know that that's an option. You kind of have to look at the map to know where the 14 miles is because you don't want to trespass beyond that, but there's basically a bridge, and if you go past the bridge, you'd be trespassing by being on the river, but for that 14 miles, you can enjoy the Wakarusa River. Now let's go in the other direction. If you get on the Wakarusa River below Clinton and head to Eudora, you are trespassing. That is not a public waterway. It's completely surrounded by private land. So until you get to the Eudora boat ramp, and then they have permission for users to use the river down to the Kansas River. So I know people don't know that, but I see them all the time get on the boat ramp and hang a left, and if I'm down there, I'll say, you're trespassing. Like, well, it's the truth.
Who are you?
Yeah, who are you? And I'm like, well, the game warden can write you a ticket. I mean, do you want a ticket? I mean, they can. Legally, that's what the law says. And it's my job to make sure they understand what the law says. It's up to them to decide whether they're still gonna do it or not, so. But anyway, you can paddle, of course. You can boat. You can camp on the sandbars and you can fish. You don't need a reservation. You don't need a permit for your kayak or your canoe. You do need a permit for a motorized boat and you do need a fishing license. But other than that, you can go enjoy a sandbar. And so this is a group of women scientists on the Kansas River enjoying a bonfire. There's plenty of driftwood down on the sandbar. We tell people, do not go up the banks. You'll be trespassing. You do not need to bother people's private property, but down on the river, there's plenty of driftwood. There's no shortage of it. So you just light you up a fire and enjoy the sandbar. And what's considered public is the area between the high water mark on the river. So if you look at the muddy bank and you see the vegetation going up, that's private property. The muddy bank going down, including the sandbars, belongs to the people of the state of Kansas, and it's a public waterway. So, all right, this is our river access map. And you'll see Eudora is on the map. Starting out in Junction City, the boat ramps are they're the red dots. They're about 10 miles apart, except for this 14-mile section that I told you about from Ogden to Manhattan through the Flint Hills. Once you get to Bellevue, there's a 30-mile stretch to Topeka. That's also one of my favorites because you have 30 miles that nobody else ever wants to do, and so it's pretty quiet. At the end of the year, we do that 30-mile stretch with our volunteer base. So just a way to get everybody out, and we stayed 2 nights out on the river. So you get down to Eudora. Of course, you put on the Wakarusa River, you go 1 mile down to the Kansas River, and then 10 miles to DeSoto. So it makes an 11-mile trip. This is very, very popular among people from Kansas City. And the reason is because it's not that far for them to get out of the city. They get the 10-mile, 11-mile stretch that they're looking for so they can camp overnight. There are no structures in the river. So there's no dams, no weirs. There's no safety issues besides the fact that you're on a river. So like out here in Topeka, you have the Topeka Weir. In Lawrence, you have Bowersock Dam, and then down past Edwardsville, you have the Water One Weir. And in each of those cases, you either have to portage around it or you have to know what you're doing. And I would never recommend that a beginner challenge themselves with those sections of the river.
What's a
But
weir?
it's a structure in the water that diverts water over to the side for water intake for a municipality. So the Topeka Weir structure sends water over for Topeka to get their drinking water. And the Water One Weir down right underneath the 435 bridge in Johnson County sends water over for, it's called Water One of Johnson County. It's the water supply utility for Johnson County. But Eudora to DeSoto. So just yesterday, someone emailed me, said, Dawn, I want to take my 13-year-old daughter out on the Kansas River. It'll be her first time. Dad is very experienced, but he says, these are my options. Lawrence to DeSoto, Eudora to DeSoto, or Lecompton to Lawrence. I said, the only option is Eudora to DeSoto. Because Lawrence to DeSoto is 20 miles. That's too long for a 13-year-old. She'll hate it, and she'll never want to do it again. And you want them to come back, right? You want them to want to enjoy it enough, right? Lecompton to Lawrence has what we call the wind tunnel, and there's a chance of 20% chance of rain Saturday. And if you're in the wind tunnel and the wind's out of the south, you're going to have whitecaps. Also not a good choice for someone who's learning. So, but Eudora to DeSoto is perfect because there are no structures in the river. They can enjoy it. They can camp on a sandbar. It's easy. It's really a great space for them. So we love our boat ramp here in Eudora. All right, last little bit I'm going to go through here is cleaning up the Kansas River. So these are just mostly some photos just to let you know what we've been doing. We've pulled over 4,000 tires in the last 5 years, 35 tons of battery cases, old metal bridges, plastic appliances, and more. We have a goal that by 2030 we'll remove all of these sites, and we're well on our way, and we know we're going to make that goal. So what happened was, we call the tires failed bank stabilization projects. My dad told me a story that there was a tire salesman in Kansas City that would come out to the rural areas and offer tires for free to farmers to put on the banks of their farm because they thought that it would keep the river from taking their farm. Oh. And that doesn't work. What does work are trees and deep-rooted grasses. If you want to protect land from a river, that's what works. But we ended up with all of these tires embedded into sandbars, and there were 500 of them just before the Eudora Bridge. And we removed those in 2020 and 2021. Right now we're working on a site at DeSoto. We've already removed 600 tires. We think we're gonna have over 1,000 by the time we're done. So we call these the donuts. So these are the donuts that are embedded into sandbars at DeSoto. So this problem was created by my parents and my grandparents' generation. I'm cleaning that up. We're gonna take care of all these things. The really old stuff, the tires, the battery cases, the old metal bridges. Transportation used to drop them in the river. They don't anymore. But this problem, the plastic problem, that's going to be my son and my grandson's generational problem. We have got to get to the point where we reduce our plastic consumption use. This is just a lot of people out helping us on these. We've done tire cleanups at Shawnee, Tecumseh, Eudora, and DeSoto. We do have a tire map. I know it sounds a little crazy, but we have a map where we know where all of these are in the river. So that we can work on getting them out. But this is the project at DeSoto. the donuts where we started, by the time we pulled them out, they have to be pulled out by hand, and then we stack them up, and then Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks brings their airboats, because that's the only way we can get them off the river. They're just too heavy. And we take them, and plus we had DeSoto Fire Department also has an airboat. They came and helped, and then Kansas Backcountry Hunters and Anglers also helps us get all of those off.
I know that just by using a tire for a sandbox for my children,
Yeah,
that's heavy.
it is
And
heavy.
to think about pulling a tire out of the river that had been in there forever, I don't see my muscles being able to do very
It
many of
is
those.
very hard, and our volunteer base is anywhere between, I think our youngest volunteer is 21, and our oldest is probably in her 70s. And out there pulling tires, my husband jokes that he's gotta put me in traction every time we're done with the tire cleanup. Because it does, it just kills your back, but. We also have, battery cases. We removed over 35 tons in the last 7 years by hand. Those also have to be picked up. Those are out near Manhattan. This is what they look like. They're really heavy, but there was a company that recycled batteries for Fort Riley over 60 years ago, and these rubber cases that the truck battery sits down in were scattered. And we think what happened is a high water event like a flood washed them into the river because the site where they were located was on a bend. And we think that that's what happened, which even if they didn't, over 60 years ago, it was not illegal. The laws did not make it illegal to not dump like they do today, but we think likely it was a high water event, so.
So is there a high level of lead in the water in that area, or? any
No, because they
indication?
got rid of the batteries.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just the cases that they're in. But they're very heavy, they're brittle, when you drop them, they break into a million pieces. This is a septic tank, we drove past it kayaked past it for 2 years. Finally, we couldn't figure out how to get it off because it's huge, and finally we just took a chainsaw. And we do make a joke about it, we put a chainsaw in the back of a kayak, went out in the middle of the river and cut it up. And then we call Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks because they are such great partners on the river with their airboats. They came and got all the pieces for us and took them off the river. We also, that same day, cut up a hot tub near Ogden. This is a refrigerator, a mini fridge, a water tank. These are some more interesting finds. This is my kayak with a refrigerator door. Of course, a shopping cart, that was near Topeka, a deep freeze. This is a boat full of trash around Lawrence. Coolers, I wish I had a penny for every cooler I found on the river. They are everywhere. So yeah, interesting finds. This is a double axle trailer we found underneath the 435 bridge in Kansas City. We cut it up with a hot saw. And then our friends at Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks hauled all the metal back to the boat ramp for us to get it off the river. And this is the trash eddies. So downstream of every major city, this is what we find. Downstream of Manhattan, Topeka, Lawrence, and in Kansas City, there are these trash eddies, and they're nothing but plastic bottles. So when I said earlier that we're concerned about the trash at gas stations and at ball field complexes where the trash overflows, I just want you to think of it this way. The next time you see a trash can overflowing, remember this conversation. Because what's overflowing, all it takes is a windy Kansas day, which we have a lot of those, and that trash winds up in a river. Now, it doesn't have to go straight to the Kansas River, it has to just get within that network. So it might blow to the Wakarusa, but it might blow to Captain's Creek and then go down to the Kansas River. So yeah, this was one of our big trash eddies, and this was deep, 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 deep. So it looks like it on the surface, it's just on top, but it's not. Yeah, it took an entire day for a group of about 5 people to get this. I had a group that was out there for another activity and I had to pull them off of it to get that trash, so. But this is our game warden friend Jesse with the airboat out in Manhattan. I like to give him a shout out because he follows us all over the river to help us when he's not like dealing with poachers and stuff. So it's great to have lots of partners. This just gives you an idea of all of the cities. We have worked with the city of Eudora on all the tires that we removed out of the Kansas River just before the Eudora Bridge. They were so gracious and so good to us about working on, we had to store all the tires at the ramp in the parking lot, and we needed their help with some things, and they were just fantastic. But this just like gives you an idea that it takes all of us to deal with all these issues. We have 4 full-time people. We have over 700 volunteers, but we have all these folks. And these folks are what make it possible, having their help. So I'm gonna close out. So I hope you leave remembering 950,000 Kansans get their drinking water from the Kansas River. So the water quality is really important in the watershed. The river is a reflection of how we use the land and the water that's coming out of those major reservoirs. Prevention starts with education, which is why we think our water quality program in the schools is so important. And connecting people back to a place. Instead of them saying, oh, I just drive over the river on the bridge, we get them in a kayak on the river where they can dip their hand in the water and they can experience it and they can see a bald eagle, and it totally changes the way they feel about the river. And the last thing, of course, it takes all of us because these partnerships are key. And I'm gonna end with our Beers of the Cause coming up on November 2nd. If you like to drink beer, it's a fundraiser, but we use this watershed that I've talked about to teach people about beer. We use beer to teach people about watersheds, I should say. And so it's a fundraiser at 8 Shakes Landing, and it's really a lot of fun. And with that, I always like to end by saying small progress is still progress. So if all you get is 1 tire off the river, that's 1 less tire in the river. So thank you very much for your time. And I don't know if you want me to take any questions if you have any.
Sure.
You guys have kind of asked them as we've gone, so you may not have any.
I have one,
Okay.
might be silly.
That's okay.
Would you eat a fish that you caught out of the Kansas River?
I would, but between Lawrence and Eudora, there is still a PCB warning for fish containing high levels of PCBs. Those numbers have gone down considerably over the decades, but they still have the warning in place for people with compromised immune systems and pregnant women. So I don't have either one of those, so I probably technically could eat the fish, but that's the only warning on the entire river. But yes, I have and would.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
And the invasive
Carp.
Carp. How bad is it?
You know, actually, Wildlife and Parks has had a program in place for the last 2 years where they have been reducing the numbers. So right now, the carp come up the Missouri River. They're kind of stopped at that Water One Weir at the 435 bridge. But when the water gets high, they come over it and they come up to, and then they're stopped again at Barasock Dam. As of now, they have not been detected on the other side of Barasock Dam, west of Barasock Dam. Now, if they ever get west of there, it's gonna be really bad for our fisheries and our economy because they're connected to all the tributaries, to some really special streams in Kansas, and of course our reservoirs. I mean, there's just so many things, right, that if they get past Barasock, that it could be bad. But Wildlife and Parks has done what's called DNA testing all the way upstream. After 2019, they were worried, right? Because the carp, they're jumping at Barasock Dam when the river's really high. And so they did DNA testing and they could find no sign of them above Lawrence. So they do have a new project that they're trying to get started at Barasock Dam where there are these gates, they're like head gates that'll go on the north plant because that's where they think they're jumping up and trying to get over. And these gates, essentially, with the fish trying to jump up, they're not gonna be able to get past those gates. So they're hoping to install those sometime soon. But in the meantime, between Lawrence and that Water One dam, they've been removing them. And they're removing them because they think that their numbers in that area are not as high. And it's almost like they've become isolated. But they can't, it's harder to control the ones coming up from the Missouri River. So I don't know that it'll take a bigger effort than Kansas.
What's the problem with carp?
So these are the invasive carp. There's a lot of different species of carp, but these invasive carp came from overseas and they came in through the Great Lakes, wound up into the river systems of the United States, and are all over. But the problem is that they multiply and reproduce at such a fast rate, and they get really, really big, and they outcompete the native fish for food and for habitat and for resources. And so our native fish will decline in response to that, but also they're just like, I get hit in the head by them all the time because
In the
if they
kayaks.
hear the kayak or the john boat,
Yeah.
because they hear the noise, they're very sensitive. They have some nerve in their ear, makes them very sensitive, and so they'll jump. Well, when they jump towards you and they'll hit you. So they used to be really bad between Lawrence and Eudora. I mean, I would just duck. But the last few times I've been on the river through there, they haven't been that bad. So anyway, that's good news.
Yeah.
Are zebra mussels a problem in the river or only in the lakes?
Well, they're in the river. I mean, because the lakes outflow. So
I didn't know
there is a
in the
possibility, but
moving water.
that's what I've always been told, is that they can't really grasp on and become a problem like they do. But I think, don't quote me on this because I probably know enough to be dangerous on this topic, but I think they still cause a problem for the water intakes. Like the city of Lawrence, their water intake, I think they might still be causing them a problem. But I don't see them, and I think it's because the water's moving.
And could you describe a mud boat?
Oh, yeah, a mud motor. It's a mud motor.
I thought you said
So-
mud boat.
I might have.
Okay.
So,
Well, I know what it
you
is.
take a john boat and you put a motor on the back of it, that it's a long arm
Yeah.
that sticks out the back. So it's like a swamp motor. And they're used in, the Everglades and different places, a lot of wetland spaces or Everglade type spaces where the water's really shallow. But when we're out doing river cleanups, the river has to be really low. It has to almost be drought conditions because we want to be able to see everything to get the tires out. And so the mud motor will go in about that much water. So it's really nice.
Can you talk about the adopt a boat ramp?
Adopt a boat ramp program. So local communities can adopt a local boat ramp and they can clean it up once a quarter for us. And that keeps trash out of the river stream. The Eudora boat ramp was adopted at one time by Refuge Christian Church when Jeremiah was the pastor. And when he left, I believe that has not continued. So the boat ramp is actually up for adoption. If you know anyone in town, a group, it can be like, we have individuals that do it, but we also have like Cub Scout groups or a business or a Rotary Club, a Lions Club.
Just like up the highways.
Yeah, same concept. Okay. Anything else?
So tell me how safe it is. I would say I'm a novice kayaker.
Mhm.
I love it, but I don't get out that often, and I don't really have any friends that do. So when I'm out, I'm on my own. So I do tend to go to small ponds,
Sure.
lakes, small lakes. But I've done Wakarusa, but just going west and back. But I really want to go to DeSoto, but I don't know how to get back. You have to
That's
do a
the
lot of
challenge.
planning
You do.
to do
Yeah.
that.
We have in the summer, our season's over, but we have for this year, but we have beginner Wednesdays and it's meant for novices to go on the river for the first time. We will pair you up with one of our volunteers. They're called Kaw River Guides, and they're your buddy, and they stay with you the whole trip. And so they'll like teach you how to read the river and teach you safety things. We'll do a big safety talk before we leave. We go as a group, but you get a buddy also. I recommend doing something like that the first time. I have a personal rule. We don't go out on the Kansas River without a buddy. I'm 10 years ago, I mean, my dad taught me that when I was a kid, and I've held on to it my whole life, but I also promised my husband when I took this job, you know, yes, we'll always have buddy systems. So I think it's just a good practice to always have somebody with you. So if you can find a group, our group does the beginner events. There's a group in Topeka called Dirty Girl Adventures. They do a lot of women trips. There's a group in Kansas City called Kansas City Canoe and Kayak. So you can find a group to go with. The whole shuttling thing, if you wanted to, you know, say you and a friend wanted to go do it, then you could have somebody drop you off, or like what we do is we just take 2 cars. Yeah, we drop one and
You have to
take the
go
other
there
one.
and
Yeah.
drop it off and come.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I know, growing up in Lawrence, I grew up in Lawrence, my dad always pushed, you don't play in the Kansas River. You just stay away from it, there's
Yeah.
undercurrents, blah, 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 blah. So I've always been frightened. I
Well, it's
really
also
haven't
very
afraid of-
generational. My grandpa told me the same thing. I mean, I was told, like, we lived in a farmhouse. I could walk from the farmhouse down to the river's edge, and I was told, you do not go down there without an adult. And even then, you don't get too close, right? So I can remember the same things. And I think, you know, we didn't walk around with life jackets everywhere like we do today. Like,
Yeah.
I wear, the minute I get into the parking lot of the boat ramp, my life jacket goes on, and it doesn't come off until I get into the truck to drive home. I mean, it's just like, it's my uniform. You just get used to wearing it. But, you know, back then, I just don't think we had kind of some of those same things either. And we also couldn't watch the flows on the river. We had no idea what it was doing. We had no idea what the weather forecast was. Right, we didn't have any of that information that we have at our fingertips today. I can look at my phone right now and tell you exactly what the river's doing right here at Eudora in this second. And that's crazy.
That's cool, yeah.
We didn't know that back then, so, yeah.
Well, the one thing that I'm smiling about coming out of here is all those sandbar parties that I thought were illegal.
Yeah, no.
They weren't.
They
Oh,
weren't.
darn.
No, they were not illegal.
I
You
wasn't
could have,
being wild
you could have
after
gone. Well, thank you all very much. It was a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Ben, for the
Thanks.
opportunity.
Thanks, Don.
So, thank you. Yeah.